Hi, I'm Stella, and welcome to Salicot Cinemas, where I talk about movies because I watch too many and have too many opinions about them. This video, I'll be going over another trope that centers around Asian characters. If you're into that kind of thing, maybe consider subscribing. And/or leave a comment to suggest what other Asian tropes that you think I should cover. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Kung Fu hero, where he came from, who he is, and what other variations of him there are. Some parameters before I start, this video will only be going over American movies, even though I will be inevitably be talking about Hong Kong cinema in the history section of this. I'll lightly breeze over some TV shows, but again, this will be mostly movie-centric. In the Kung Fu section of the Kung Fu hero, I am mostly referring to Kung Fu as a blanket term for most martial arts, even though these combat styles are very different. Mostly because A, martial arts hero doesn't have quite the same ring to it, and B, even if the characters are using karate, taekwondo, silat, etc., the character traits and the actual narrative structures are heavily influenced by Hong Kong cinema, which was popularized in America by Bruce Lee back in the 70s. And Hong Kong cinema predominantly has different variations of Kung Fu. Also, this might go without saying, I will only be covering live action movies with actual Asian actors. So no, Kung Fu Panda does not count. Anyway, let's get started. In Xiaxin Chen's paper, Kung Fu Moves in American Movies, Chen points out that though Bruce Lee is credited to have the biggest contribution to the popularization of Kung Fu in the US, Kung Fu as a martial art had already gained traction in America before any of his movies had come out. In 1922, the first Kung Fu Club had opened in the US. At the time, it was forbidden for anyone who was not Chinese to learn the art form. This is where there were some complications for Lee when it was discovered that he was a quarter German from his mother's side. However, his friend William Chung spoke on his behalf, and he was eventually accepted into Yip Man School. This is notable because, as I will outline with the other KFHs, the majority of them have already mastered a martial art before becoming an actor, or at least go through great lengths to learn different fighting styles prior to filming. Years later, Bruce Lee played Kato in the 1966 TV show called Green Hornet. It became the first TV show to popularize an Asian man playing a character with an Asian fighting style. Hollywood did Bruce Lee a lot of dirty, since they kept giving him a lot of supporting roles when he desired to be a leading man. So he went to Hong Kong with the hopes of making a feature to showcase to Hollywood execs. There he got a deal with Golden Harvest, a Hong Kong production company which is now called Orange Sky Golden Harvest. This studio rivaled the Shaw Brothers, an even bigger production company from Hong Kong. And that is when he starred in the 1971 movie, The Big Boss, also known as Fists of Fury, that jump-started his big success. Every time Lee would star in a new movie, it would break the box office records that the previous one had set. Unfortunately, 6 days before the release of his final film, Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee died in 1973. That same year, Enter the Dragon skyrocketed in the charts. There were many tactless attempts to replace Bruce Lee, where they would cast lookalikes that didn't have nearly the same level of skill. It was bad enough that it even had its own term, Bruceploitation. It didn't really stop until Jackie Chan rose to fame in the late 70s with his genre-shifting comedies Snake and Eagle's Shadow and Drunken Master. Kung Fu movies started to gain international traction, with Fists of Fury in particular, because they had also released English-dubbed versions in America and Europe. And thus we have the bizarre clips with the audio that does not align with the actor's lips at all.
You have been wounded by a poisonous dart. In a few minutes, you are going to die.
I don't even know you. Why should you want to take my life?
However, the spotlight on Kung Fu had a bit of a lull after Bruce Lee died, and the hype for it back in America didn't come back up until Jackie Chan had his first American blockbuster. The equally iconic and admittedly problematic, oldie but hot trash goodie, Rush Hour, did the hype start to pick up again. And The Matrix came out in 1999, which was a smash hit in America that was choreographed by Yuen Woo-ping, who, if you remember earlier, was the director of Jackie Chan's first smash hit, Snake and Eagle's Shadow and Drunken Master. Today, we still have the likes of Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and Donnie Yen as our most popular stars in American movies as Kung Fu heroes. 3 of the 4, obviously Bruce Lee was the #1, founding fathers, the premiering papas, the do-it-first daddies of American martial arts movies. A lot of the Kung Fu hero has a lot of similarities to the damaged ninja girl, a trope that I covered in another video. Rule number 1. He is explicitly Asian, be it through his skill in martial arts or a strong accent that is probably heightened for laughs, to other him from other people, or characters constantly pointing it out.
Please tell me you speak English. Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? I don't want no.
It is likely that he is a righteous cop, or he has a family that he is vehemently protecting. He is typically a stoic who is highly disciplined and by the book. This is usually juxtaposed in a buddy cop scenario where he is paired with an American partner who is much more laid back than he is and tries to teach him the Western way of living. Although in most of Jackie Chan's and some of Donnie Yen's recent roles, the character is purposefully funny and is the actual jokester through physical humor or witty quips.
Are you kidding me? I'm blind!
Similar to the damaged ninja girl, the kung fu hero is one of the heroes. Even though he is highly skilled in combat and likely has a high kill count, he has a heart of gold and has justice and doing the right thing as his top priority. However, one big difference between the DNG and the kung fu hero is that the DNG almost is never the lead character, while the kung fu hero probably is. This is in large part because the actor of whoever is playing the kung fu hero is already an established actor who got big in Asia first, and has a guaranteed audience that the studio can sell to. As I mentioned earlier, it is very common or almost a requirement for the actor to have mastered whatever martial art that they are depicting on screen. He's been training for probably decades before they even had a camera on him. Most of the time, they're starring one of the do-it-first daddies or premiering papas that I mentioned earlier. There's also the likes of Dacascos here and there since the 90s, and also Iko Uwais, Yayan Ruhian, and Sesep Arif Rahman, and Tony Jaa starting to make it into American cinema. The kung fu hero is very hypermasculine, particularly in American movies. It's almost as though it is a response to how Asian men in the West are viewed as effeminate, less attractive, and less threatening to white men. This can be shown in The Expendables, especially in the first film. There might be some examples in the other installments to the franchise, but I'm gonna be honest, I have only seen the first movie and I don't really have any desire to see the others. Jet Li's role is primarily there as a token Asian dude that is the butt of all their racist jokes, and is written in a way to elevate the macho-ness of the other men. Somehow, his character feels compelled to stay loyal to this group, even though they're all frankly really shitty towards him.
They've got a small army. What do we got? 4.5 men.
Not so funny.
There are so many examples of white-dominated movies throwing a token Asian character in as a tool to flex their fragile masculinity. So when the kung fu hero is finally in the spotlight, they are almost always the opposite of that. Hence the KFH being a strong emphasis of being in protector roles, of defending the law, his country, or his family. While they are generally not hulking out at the seams like some American action heroes, there's usually some gratuitous display of his muscles. And if I'm being honest, my thirsty ass is here for it. While his moves might be super cool to watch or visually interesting, this trope has not evolved in the same way that others have. He is always heterosexual, and he has always had the ideal masculine body, at least in American movies. We do get Donnie Yen's Chiru in Rogue One that does not fit the quote-unquote perfect human body. He's blind, therefore he has an apparent physical weakness that none of the other KFHs have. But since he is such a strong believer in the Force and/or is Force sensitive and is still able to fight very well, he might as well be able to see. And also, he still has Donnie Yen's body. I, for one, think that they wasted Donnie Yen in this movie. They definitely should have had him as a reoccurring character as some kick-ass Jedi or Sith. Having Donnie Yen in Star Wars and not wielding a lightsaber in some sort of way is a crime. Same thing goes for having Yayan Ruhian, Iko Uwais as cameos in Force Awakens instead of having some significant combat scene. One notable evolution of the kung fu hero is the kung fu anti-hero. Unlike the hero, the anti-hero is disillusioned with the law. He has likely worked previously as a soldier or some sort of law enforcement and has realized that there is a flaw in the system. Rather than justice or doing the right thing as his motivators, his family is what drives him. The story will have killed his wife and/or child either off-screen before the events of the film have started or at the beginning of the movie as an emotional motivator, aka fridging.
There's nothing I can do.
What if your wife and daughter were killed by bomb?
I do everything in my power to get justice.
You will tell me who killed my child.
I don't know.
You will change your mind.
Instead of trying to hold up the law like the kung fu hero, the anti-hero actively works against it. Their kill count is much more evident, yet we still root for him because he is trying to avenge his murdered family. Interestingly enough, even though the KFAH is already working against the law, the other Asians or the other people of color in the movie are likely viewed as the actual bad guys. It could be argued that there is a spin to the kung fu anti-hero is that he is almost anti-government. anti-policing? Bear with me here. While the filmmakers may not have intended to have some sort of political agenda with this, it is worth noting, since I said earlier that the kung fu hero is commonly a police officer, unlike our anti-heroes, who is someone that does not trust the authorities to do their job, continuously bombs them and torments them until they do what he wants, and yet somehow ends up as being the protagonist and ultimately the sympathetic character rather than a villain. He breaks the rules and constantly outsmarts the authorities, and that's what makes this variation so compelling. There could be an argument made that some of Keanu Reeves' roles could fall under this category. Many of them more or less fit the profile of having an unflappable moral code, is highly versed in martial arts, and typically is a stoic. There's also the added bonus of when preparing for the John Wick movies, Reeves has put in a lot of effort to actually learn judo and other martial arts for the role. This is in large part because Chad Stahelski is the creator, who was Reeves' stunt double in The Matrix and an actor who had a career in Hong Kong. The only gray area that I can see some people fighting me on is that none of these characters fulfill the explicit Asianness of the KFH, since Reeves only has mixed Asian lineage. And as far as I'm aware, other than 47 Ronin, none of his other movies have any dialogue that bluntly points out his ethnicity, in the same way that we see with Jackie Chan and Jet Li.
Get out there!
Why me?
Because you're smaller!
For the sake of argument, let's take a look at John Wick, since he almost perfectly fits into the kung fu anti-hero trope. I don't know how I haven't had a video talking about one of my favorite franchises, but let's squeeze that in. His wife Helen was killed off screen from a sickness, and the inciting incident was the infamous killing of Daisy, the puppy that was given to him by Helen, which pushes John to hunt down the Russian gangsters who did it. He has a high kill count, but neither he nor the movie is trying to glorify his kills as morally superior than any of the villains. John Wick is a stoic that once abided by the rules of the council and was well known for being one of the best in his field. As the series progresses, he goes from wanting to fight his way back to the freedom of having a normal life to just wanting to take revenge on the people that had taken advantage of him. Despite this descent, we still root for him and want him to win. There's also the landmark of this franchise being well known for its attention to detail, with their gratuitous stunts and fight choreography, like all other KFH movies. In 2017's The Foreigner, 2007's War, and 2018's Mile 22, the anti-hero is almost framed like a MacGuffin. I mean this in the sense that the pursuit of these characters to be captured, controlled, or supposedly killed by the white protagonist is essential to the plot. Yet instead of revealing that these characters are unimportant, like the MacGuffins that Alfred Hitchcock describes, they are instead unveiled as the hero rather than the villain of the narrative, and their white counterparts are actually the bad guys. Like Pierce Brosnan's character was a corrupt politician, and Mark Wahlberg's role who killed a Russian official's child. This is especially apparent in War, with Jason Statham and Jet Li's personas. The movie begins with Statham playing an FBI agent named Crawford, and Terry Chen playing Tom, his partner. The first act ends with Tom seemingly dying along with his wife and child. Jet Li's character, who has the alias Rogue, is positioned to look like Tom's assassin. The story follows him as he works for the Yakuza, and Crawford tries to hunt him down to avenge his friend's death. However, in the third act, there is the most bizarre turn of events where it is revealed that Crawford was actually a dirty cop, and was the reason why the Yakuza was in Tom's house in the first place. And Rogue was actually Tom after plastic surgery, and he was playing the long con to gain the Yakuza's trust so that he could kill them because of what had happened to his wife and daughter.
Change it your face, your voice, also you could get to me.
It was a weird movie. Time and time again, we get the same story. And while they're still very entertaining to watch, I will admit I'm not watching The Expendables or Xander Cage Returns for its intricate plotlines. With that said, I think that trying to combat the negative view that Western society has on Asian men with this hyper-masculine posturing is overcompensating. We always see a man who is emotionally constipated that is trying to use violence to right a wrong that had been done to him in the beginning of the movie. Or they try to fool us into thinking that he's the villain, only to pull out a shitty plot twist last second. There is a lot of value in showcasing how someone who doesn't fit the traditional masculine traits being able to kick ass and take names. Maybe for once, we could see the kung fu anti-hero defending someone who is actually alive. This way, we could see an exploration of that friendship or relationship and the emotional depth of the protagonist. Tenderness and emotional vulnerability does not necessarily have to hinder an exciting and action-packed plotline. The Kung Fu hero is probably the most exposed form of Asian representation that we get in Western cinema. For a lot of us, he is the persona that we have grown up with, be it through Jackie Chan's earliest movies, and eventually evolved into the anti-hero through our adulthoods. He's fun to watch, and it is a visual and physical marvel to see how these different actors pull off their various stunts. With that said, even though he has turned into a more gray-tone character, rather than shallowly wanting to abide by the law, there is a lot of room for the Kung Fu hero and anti-hero to grow. He has had many depictions throughout the last 50 years, and yet there are not that many variations of masculinity that have been explored with him. It would be much more fulfilling and compelling to see how other narratives can showcase a wider range of personality, beyond just being an emotionally repressed man who just wants to protect people. You can still have a three-dimensional story that exposes more trauma that he has been through, and still keep it action-packed and entertaining. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed that, don't forget to leave me a like or a comment, and maybe consider joining the fam and subscribing. And maybe you can swing by my Instagram so you don't miss any updates that I have for this channel. I've been Salakot Cinemas. Thanks for watching. Bye!